let's talk about the Notre Dame team. And the reason the topic to this is it's kind of relevant because the original question is number one, does Notre Dame need to have a Heisman contender to win a championship? And I think I want to address that part first.
Okay.
And when I mean Heisman contender, I'm talking about like not a guy that finishes like 9th or 10th because Notre Dame's a good team, but a guy that's a Heisman contender because he is just that good. So a top 5 is what I'm looking for.
Right.
They had one in 2012 with Manti. They should have had one. I mean, let's be honest about this. If Jalen Smith was under a real defensive coordinator, he would have been a Heisman. He would have been a finalist, I believe.
Yeah.
You know, and so I mean that's a little bit of a unique one. But looking at this team, Sean, you look at the 2018 team, great team.
Yep.
But then they kind of got a little bit overwhelmed in the playoff because they didn't have that one guy that you could kind of put a team on his shoulders and say, you know, like Kyler Murray took a team that was not nearly as good as Notre Dame in that year and made that a much more competitive game than the talent level should have dictated.
Yeah.
The exact opposite happened in Notre Dame. That should have been a much closer game that was not because they didn't have that guy that could just kind of take a game over and say, I got this, the way that Trevor Lawrence did in 2019 against Clemson.
Yeah.
I mean, against Ohio State in the playoff, for example. And so I think the first part is, does Notre Dame need a Heisman contender to compete to get to the playoff? No. Yeah. They've already done that multiple times without that guy.
Yeah.
Do they need a Heisman contender to win a championship? I think, I've thought a lot about it, and I'd have to say, yeah, because if you look at the last, the playoff teams, 2014 Ohio State, I don't know where the voting was in 2014. I'm actually going to go pull it up here real quick. I would imagine, JT Barrett was 5th, and he wasn't even their best player. Ezekiel Elliott was.
Yeah.
So I would argue they had 2 Heisman caliber players. So that was on the 14 championship team.
Yeah.
The runner-up that year had the Heisman winner and Marcus Mariota. 2015, the national championship team had the Heisman Trophy winner, Derrick Henry. The runner-up team, Clemson, had the number 3 guy in Heisman Trophy voting. And I'm going to tell you right now, that shows you how sick Derrick Henry was that year, because for Christian McCaffrey not to win the Heisman with the year he had, shows you how good that Derrick Henry was that year, and he was a monster that year. 2016 voting, the team that won the national championship had a guy that finished 2nd in Heisman voting, Deshaun Watson. 2017, the team that won the national championship was Alabama. They did not have a Heisman contender. Neither did the team that they beat. But again, 2017 is a year that we pointed to as a bit of an anomaly season, in my opinion. 2018, same deal. The team that won the national championship, Clemson, did not have a Heisman Trophy player per se. The highest ranked guy was Travis Etienne at number 7. I would argue he had but they had like 4 studs that kind of took some of the shine off each other.
Yeah.
T. Higgins, Justin Ross, and of course Trevor Lawrence didn't step into the starting lineup till like game 4. But Trevor Lawrence played like a Heisman Trophy contender down the stretch. But then you look at the team that was the runner-up. They had the number 2. They had the runner-up for the Heisman, Tua Tagovailoa. The other team in the playoff in the national championship game that year, Oklahoma, or in the playoff that year, Oklahoma, guy won the Heisman. 2019, duh. I mean, Joe Burrow. The team that they beat, Clemson, had 2 guys that finished in the top 10.
Yeah.
Trevor Lawrence and Travis Etienne. And then the other playoff team that year, Oklahoma, had a guy that finished 2nd. And then the national runner-up that year, the other playoff team that led most of that game had Justin Fields, who finished 3rd, and Chase Young, who finished 4th. So they had 2 guys in the top 5. 2020, obviously Alabama won it all. They had the Heisman. They had the number 1 and number 3 guy. And then, of course, this past year, the team that won it all did not have a guy in the top. They had a guy 9th. Their nose tackle was 9th, which is absurd that Jordan Davis was a top 10 Heisman Trophy candidate finisher. He played like 30 snaps a freaking game.
I know one thing. I would have put their tight end in the top 10.
I mean, if you're going to put a defensive player in their top 10, there's 5 other guys you could have turned to besides the nose tackle.
Absolutely. Nicole Dean could have been in the top 10.
Exactly. So you look at like 8 years of playoffs, and there's been 2 teams that wasn't the case for. Those are anomalies. Those are not the normal scenarios. So I do think for Notre Dame to win it, we have to agree that they have to have at least one guy on offense that is a very dynamic, take a game over, matchup nightmare, either a great skill player like, I don't even want to say it, but like a Derrick Henry and Devontae Smith, Travis Etienne, that kind of guy, or a quarterback. It's got to be one of those 2. So, Sean, we agree that they have to have a title contender, a Heisman contender to win a title. Do we agree?
It goes along with the trend. Absolutely.
So let's talk about who that might be for Notre Dame.
I actually think, based upon what we've seen and the love that defensive players have gotten recently, I think Foskey has a chance to be a Heisman candidate. I really do. Especially, remember we talked, and I'm not trying to rile you up, we talked about several games last year where teams were able, based upon knowing what Notre Dame would do with certain things or how they would shift with motion, they basically would take Foskey out of the play.
Could, yeah.
And they didn't have to worry about him rushing the passer, which for them was like, that's the best thing in the world. You mean all we have to worry about is Jason and Myron, pretty much? Cool. I think Notre Dame comes up with a way for Foskey to be more involved in the pass rush, more significantly. I think Riley Mills on the other side makes him a better player. I think they make each other better players.
That's the key. He needs more help in the pass rush game.
Absolutely.
And Riley, Jason, and Marist can all provide that.
Because if you watch the Stanford game, you'll hear all game about them raving about the number of sacks Notre Dame has. That wasn't because they could just set up with their front 4 and just go get the quarterback. And Notre Dame did a lot of blitzing last year to get to the quarterback, and it was successful, but certain teams, especially late in the year, found ways to take advantage of getting certain players in one-on-one situations out in space and being able to make plays. And we saw the lack of tackling at the end of the season defensively come into play for Notre Dame. Isaiah Foskey would be one. Specifically because he's already been an All-American at another school, Brandon Joseph could be another one. If he gets to 6, 7, 8 interceptions on a team that's playing for a college football playoff berth at the end of the season, he could be a sneaky pick for the Heisman. He could.
He also could potentially be their punt returner.
Absolutely.
And that I mean, you take a couple back to the house, right? He would need something like that. He would need, and that's the one thing that, I mean, let's not kid ourselves that Charles Woodson catching a pass and returning a punt against Ohio State wasn't the reason he won the Heisman. It wasn't for the sick interception he had against Michigan State. It wasn't that he was the best defensive player in college football there. That's not what we wanted. If he only played corner, he doesn't win the Heisman. It's just, I mean, that shouldn't be the case. It's supposed to go to the most outstanding player. So Julius Peppers should have probably won it. And Ndamukong Suh probably should have won it. Charles Woodson rightfully won it, but only because he was a punt returner, wide receiver. Also. So that's you're right. Brandon Joseph, if he's like top 15 in punt returns, maybe takes a couple back to the house, like you said, hopefully one of those is like in a big game or something like that, or has a pick 6. It's going to have to be something like that. I agree with you on that.
Yeah, he's a dark horse Heisman candidate. You go to the obvious is, look, if you're the quarterback at Notre Dame, you're on the Heisman watch list. Like,
right.
You just are. So if Tyler Buckner, he's not C.J. Stroud or Bryce Young, in my opinion. I don't think they're going to put the weight of the world on his shoulders like C.J. Stroud and Bryce Young will have in the passing game. But not from a stature standpoint or a physical stature, but just from impact. If he can have a Cam Newton type impact with his legs and with his arm, and they go on a nice little run, I can see Tyler Buckner being in the top 5.
Yeah, see, I was going to bring him up last. But we can go there now.
Yeah, those are my three.
I was gonna go with another first.
Okay.
Let me go with another first.
Yeah.
And this is gonna seem crazy. I do think that there's a chance that Michael Mayer could pop into that conversation. And I know it's rare, and there's only been like 2 tight ends that have won the Heisman Trophy, and they were all back like before our parents were born, right? One of which was a Notre Dame guy, Leon Hart.
Leon Hart, yeah.
But I think the Heisman Trophy a lot of times goes to the team that, goes to the best offensive player on the best team, right? And it's normally a running back, receiver, or quarterback. I think if Notre Dame uses Michael Mayer in a way where he is an 80-catch, 1,000-plus yard guy, I could see him being a contender. Because, again, we're not talking about winning it. We're talking about how a guy is a legitimate, like, top 5-ish type of contender. That's what we're talking about here, right? And, if Tyler Buckner kind of is a really good player, would it be enough for him to become a Heisman contender? I'll get to that in a second.
Yeah.
But I would also say if he's having that kind of year that you talked about, Sean, he means he's probably throwing a lot of balls to Michael Mayer. I look at 2020. Kyle Pitts had 43 catches for 770 yards, and he had 17.9 yards per attempt, 12 touchdowns. Now, one of the things that hurt Kyle Pitts that year, he was a monster, is he also had a quarterback that finished in the top 5, Kyle Trask.
Yeah.
Kyle Trask got more of the attention. If Tyler Buckner has a really good year, unless he has like an elite year, I'm talking about a good year, 3,300 yards passing, 30 touchdowns, 500-600 yards rushing. That's a heck of a year. That could get him in that conversation, but it could also mean that number one, they're going to be a playoff team if that's the kind of year he has.
Oh, without a doubt.
And I think that there's a chance that Michael Mayer, the way that they're going to use him, he could put up. I mean, would it shock you if Michael Mayer had like 80 catches for like 1,100 yards and 10 plus touchdowns? It wouldn't shock me. I mean, that's a lot. I'm not predicting it. So again, we're just talking a little bit not hyperbolically, but theoretically.
I don't think we will want that. Right.
Well, I would say
we would like to see maybe 60, and then a Lorenzo have about 40.
I would actually want to see that, and here's why I say that. I get where you're coming from, Sean, and I think we agree. But here's what I mean: if Lorenzo balls out, if Braden becomes a big play guy, then that means it's harder to stop Michael Mayer.
Right.
So if he catches 80 for 1,100 and 10 plus scores, it means he's getting a lot of matchups where he's able to make plays.
Yeah.
And that would be my thing. Because I felt like one of the things that hurt Tyler Eifert in 2012, because if you actually look at his production in 2011, when he was not an All-American, which is just still so many of the absurd things, because he didn't have the hype in 2011 that he had in 2012. But if you actually look at Tyler Eifert's numbers, he was far better in 2011 than he was in 2012 when he won the Mackey Award.
Yeah.
In 2011, he had 63 catches for 803 yards.
Right.
And the next year, he only had 50 catches for 685 yards. He had one fewer touchdown. What was the difference? Well, Notre Dame was a better team in 2012. And then but here's the difference in the numbers. Forget the perception of the numbers. In 2011, you couldn't double team Tyler Eifert, because if you did, Michael Floyd was going to destroy you.
Yeah.
And so Michael Mayer was the guy, or Michael Floyd was the guy that you had to put the attention on. And so when Michael Mayer was that dude and nobody else stepped up, then that tamped down his numbers. And they were more of a running team in 2012 as well. There's other factors. It's never quite that simple. So my point is, if Michael Mayer goes off like that, Sean, the only way it happens is if game one, Lorenzo Styles steps up and is that guy. And also it means they're throwing a lot more than we anticipate too.
Yeah.
And then number 3, it means that somebody else, Lindsey, somebody along those lines, is someone who is going to step up too. There's no way Michael Mayer has that production if other guys step up, which is your point. We want to see other guys stepping up as well. I actually think that could result. And here's the other final thing too, is I don't see Mayer being like a 9-catch, 150-yard guy against Ohio State. I could be wrong, but I just think their defense is going to be so geared to him. But if those other guys step up, come mid-October on, when Notre Dame has some big games, then that's when Michael Mayer is going to go off, because their teams are saying, well, we got to make a business decision on who we're going to slow down, and we're going to slow down. We're going to not focus on this. Let's be honest, the slowest. who's going to be the slowest skill player on the field for Notre Dame this year? It's going to be Michael Mayer.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's a decision that some teams may have to make if the other guys are balling out. Avery Davis and, Braden and Lorenzo and hopefully Dion and Tobias and the running backs and all that kind of stuff. So I'd say that would be one where I don't think there's a chance in heck that a tight end wins a Heisman Trophy. But could he be in that conversation to where he has a sort of a generational tight end season?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it could be there.
I would actually, this is for me, like receptions, I agree with what you said.
Mm-hmm.
I would much rather him be 60 to 65 and raise that average perception per reception up from 11 to about 14, 15.
Yeah.
And increase the touchdowns.
Mm-hmm.
That, for me, would be perfect because I anticipate Lorenzo Styles' usage going up this year. Hopefully, every year it seems like we hope for Braden Lindsey to take the next step. And then we don't know. Heck, Tobias Merriweather, second half of the season, might become one of the guys.
Well, if Michael Mayer averages 14.5 yards a catch, it's just a good number. It's not an elite number for a tight end, right? It's a good number, though. I mean, Kyle Pitts was at 17.9. He's a different player. I'm not expecting that.
Right.
But let's just say he was at 15. If he catches 16 balls at 15 yards a catch, that's 975 yards.
Exactly.
If he jumps it up to, 68 catches times 15. Now, if he has 68 catches at 15 yards a catch, Sean, then he's over 1,000 yards, to your point. The numbers, what it's going to be about, Sean, is the touchdowns and the yards.
Yeah.
You got to get into 4 digits, however you get there. I think your point is valid, though, that the more yards per catch would mean sort of some of the bigger plays.
Yeah.
That would be key. And that's a good, and I think that might even help him even more. To your point, is if he's more of a big play tight end more than he's been, not just he catches 9 passes for 99 yards every game. Well, his production is going to be great, but is it really going to blow anybody away? No, it's not. Think about it. If he averages 7 catches for 80 yards a game, I mean,
I think the impact of
that gets him to 1,000, but that's not going to be like, wow, did you see what Michael Mayer did if he's doing it on 8, 9 catches every game? That's the point that you're making.
I think he'll have more of an impact attached to the line this year than he had last year, right? Because with Tyler Buckner, if his hand is in the ground with Tyler Buckner at quarterback,
right?
Do you come up and say we're going to put 8 in the box?
Yeah,
and leave that seam open? I think with Tyler Buckner, there are a lot of different ways now that he can really attack the field and he can be used, especially if the wide receivers step up.
I think there's 2 other things that, to me, and I somewhat agree with one of the points you made, but I was thinking a different direction. Number one is I think we're going to see Michael Mayer playing a lot more as a wide receiver this year, as a boundary.
Yeah.
And that's something we saw a lot from Tyler Eifert that we didn't see a ton from Michael Mayer last year. He was the slot attached guy.
Mm-hmm.
The other part is I think Michael Mayer is going to get some cheap yards this year too.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's going to be because of Tyler Buckner.
Yes.
It's that where he's starting to scramble and then they come up on him and he pops right over to Michael Mayer who runs for 30 yards.
Yeah.
Right. That's important. That's not a knock on Michael Mayer. That's important for a tight end to get his numbers to the point where he could be recognized as that kind of player. Somebody else made a point too, Sean, that I was going to get to is I think as the season goes on for Michael Mayer is going to be shattering all the Notre Dame tight end records. And I think that's going to be a part of it too, is if he has that 65 plus, 1,000 plus, 10 plus season, which is just an elite tight end season for a big time school like Notre Dame, you're also going to be in a situation where in doing that, he's going to be shattering the tight end records at Notre Dame. And when you start talking about some of the people he's going to be surpassing while doing that, I mean, you're getting into, I mean, he's already kind of high in a lot of these rankings. Like if you look at, let me go out here, receptions in a season by a tight end, he owns the yards in a season, but you look down to some of the career stuff. The career receptions for a Notre Dame tight end is Tyler Eifert with 140. and Ken McAfee with 128. Let me pull up Michael Mayer's.
I think he's at about 124 right now.
Correct. So he's at 113 for
113.
1,290 yards and 9 touchdowns. So at 113, he is 15 catches away from Ken McAfee. He's already third all time. He's 113 from Ken McAfee, and he's 27 away from Tyler Eifert, tying those guys. That's first half of the season production, most likely.
Yeah, yeah.
You look, he's at 1,290 yards. So if you look at receiving yards for a career for a tight end, Tyler Eifert had 840, and Ken McAfee said had 1,759. He's already third. Tyler Eifert's or Michael Mayer's already third. So if you look at the numbers there, I mean, he is less than 500 yards away from Ken McAfee, and he is less than 600 yards away from Tyler Eifert.
Heck, he could conceivably get that in the first 5 games.
Potentially. So I just, touchdowns in a career for a tight end, he's at 9, which means he's already he's already third. He's 2 behind Tyler Eifert and 6 behind Ken McAfee. So again, you're talking about shattering records at a place like Notre Dame. That could be it. But I'll say this.
So you're saying he's pretty good, huh?
He's pretty good. And he plays in an era where, I mean, look, let's be honest. Ken McAfee
played in a different era. Yeah,
correct.
Yeah,
correct.
Yeah,
He'd be put up different numbers.
Yeah.
Same with like Dave Casper, guys like that. I mean, Tyler Eifert, if he played in the current offense, would
man,
put up insane numbers.
Yeah.
That's why I say, like, be careful with kind of the comparisons of, this guy to, it's a different generation. You know what I mean? And so, if a running back from Georgia doesn't come close to getting Herschel Walker's numbers, it doesn't mean he's not a great player. Just it's a different era. Right. So that could be it. But I think one thing that you and I are going to agree on, Sean, is for Notre Dame to truly be a team that you look at and say they can play with anybody, anywhere, at any time and beat them.
Yeah.
It's going to have to be, if you're to say they're going to have a Heisman finalist, the guy that finishes in the top 5, let's just say top 5.
Right.
I think the guy that gives them the best chance of being that would be Tyler Buckner.
Agreed.
Twofold. The only way Tyler Buckner is in the top 5 is if he's healthy. Right? I mean, he can't play 10 games and be a Heisman finalist. Right? The other one is he's just a dynamic playmaker that plays well in the big games.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have to even beat Ohio State. He just has to play well, and they lose a barn burner.
Right.
And then he goes out and beats Clemson and then beats USC. Because the thing that Tyler's going to have is he's going to have some marquee games against big-time quarterbacks. He's going to start the season and end the season with that. I mean, show me a Heisman Trophy, show me a magazine or a list that talks about Heisman Trophy candidates that doesn't include C.J. Stroud and Caleb Williams. Show me one. And you won't find it.
Yeah.
They're just both on there. Who knows what happens with Clemson? Who knows about where Phil Dracovic is by that point in time in the year? I mean, there's a lot of things that could happen, but you're going to have him looking at those guys and being like, okay, this guy has a chance to because that's it, Sean. It's the marquee games, right? You got to have the marquee games. You either have to have insane numbers or you have to play well in the marquee games. And I think that was the thing, like for Joe Burrow, as good as he was, in 2019, he had some big moments and some big games and really came through in the clutch. Like, even the Texas game earlier in the year, Texas gave LSU everything they could handle, but Joe just made some sick plays in the second half of the game.
Yeah.
You look at what he did to Alabama. He went to Alabama, went 31 of 39 for 393 yards and 3 touchdowns. I mean, it's a big-time game.
Big time game.
You play Florida, who at the time was ranked number 6. He goes 21 of 24. 21 of 24 against Florida, 293 yards and 3 touchdowns. That's a big – and by the way, he added 43 yards rushing in that game. And he had 64 more yards rushing against Alabama.
Yeah.
That's the other thing is if you go look at his numbers that year, he didn't run often, but it was usually when he ran, it was in the bigger games. And, I mean, those are the things where you looked at Joe Burrow, SEC title game against Georgia. He goes 28 of 38. 28 of 38 against Georgia for 349 yards and 4 touchdowns.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing is you got to play big in big games. I think to be a legit Heisman Trophy candidate, you've got to be that guy. You've got to be that guy.
Yeah.
Here's a reality, right? We all know. Notre Dame's got to have a dynamic quarterback if they want to win a title, right?
We both agree with that.
We've said that.
Yeah.
And this is the most dynamic quarterback they've had since, say, in the starting lineup. I mean, since Deshaun, 2 ways. Brandon was a dynamic runner, but he was never going to throw enough to be that guy.
Right.
I mean, Deshaun was that guy. Deshaun had the physical talent to be that guy. He just we've talked about that. But I mean, this is their most dynamic dual threat player because even Deshaun, I would say that Tyler can be every bit the runner Malik was, but he's a little bit more natural pocket passer than Malik was. He is a more dynamic runner than even what Deshaun was, significantly more than what Deshaun was. And I think he's got a little bit more of a better feel than what Deshaun had, although Deshaun was a pretty natural passer.
Yeah.
And then, Everett just never had anywhere close to the production that was going to be there. So, I think that the ability's there. And I think that's the final piece for me as far as Heisman talk is, of all the quarterbacks that people are talking about being Heisman contenders, most of them are just pocket passers.
Yeah.
So they could kind of all I like Bryce Young. Well, I like CJ Stroud. But he's the one kid that kind of brings some of that Lamar Jackson highlight stuff to the table.
Yeah.
I'm not saying he's Lamar Jackson because he's not going to run. He's not going to rush for the yards.
Being able to use his feet to impact the game as well as using his arm.
Right. The dual threat aspects of it. Because when those guys come along, I mean, Deshaun Watson was runner-up for the Heisman Trophy in a year where he threw 17 flipping interceptions. You know what I mean? And who beat him that year? It was Lamar.
It's so funny that year. I believe they lost at home to
Pitt.
Was it Boston? Pitt?
Pitt.
I think he threw almost 80 passes in that game. It was something ridiculous.
Yeah.
They literally put the game on his back.
Mm-hmm.
And he had crazy numbers, but he turned the ball over 3 times in 78, 80 passes. It's come on, man.
He went 52 of 70.
52 of 70.
Yes. He threw 3 picks in that game.
On 70 passes.
Right. 580 yards. I mean, I'm pretty confident in saying that Tyler Buckner's not going to be sniffing 70 attempts in a game.
No.
I think the thing that hurt Deshaun that year too is Deshaun, I thought, forced himself to be too much of a pocket passer that year.
Mm-hmm.
I think that partly is why he threw so many interceptions. He was trying to prove I'm a pocket passer.
And remember, they had a lot of injuries on the offensive line that year as well.
Right.
And their running game scuffled. Until late in the year.
And they needed him to be more of a runner that year.
Yeah.
And he wasn't. And so, because the year before, Wayne Gallman had 1,527 yards, 13 touchdowns, 5.4 yards a catch, and 15, while Deshaun rushed for 1,100 yards. The next year, Deshaun went down to 629, and Wayne Gallman went down to 1,133.
Yeah.
And I think he needed to be that guy, in my opinion. And so, and then, like I said, when you look at Lamar, I mean, I'm not asking for Tyler Buckner to put up Lamar's numbers. I'm not asking to do that. He threw for 3,600 yards and rushed for 1,600 yards. Tyler Buckner's not going to do that. I'm not saying he's going to do that. But the one thing that Tyler has going for him that Lamar didn't is he plays at a big-time program that's going to be a national title contender.
But
Lamar was at Louisville.
Within this offense, Tyler has an opportunity to be very efficient.
Mm-hmm.
Because the opportunities are going to be there. I'll give you a perfect example. I watched the North Carolina game this week, and I believe it was the second touchdown in the second quarter. And they got into the red zone, and as they did all last year, they start to struggle in the red zone. And it was just a strange.
Tends to happen when you can't block anybody.
They got a penalty with Jack Cone in, and then they pulled Jack Cone out for Tyler. And then there was another mix-up with the signal. They had to take a timeout. Then they came back on the field, and they go 3 wide, and it is an RPO, and it's like Avery Davis is sitting out there 2-on-2.
Right.
It's an easy pitch.
Right.
You get the block.
He just
He just walks. Exactly. And it was just really simple. It was kind of like, okay, here's the box. The matchup is out there. It's like literally like playing point guard. And I think if he can be an efficient point guard, because I think guys like CJ Stroud and Bryce Young are like scoring point guards. Aggressive, can score the ball. When you get a true point guard, someone that can just be efficient, make the right read, doesn't have the full weight of the offense on his shoulders. You just need him to make the plays when they're available, run the ball. He's going to impact every facet of the game. That's the beautiful thing about Tyler Buckner. He's going to impact your running backs. He's going to impact the pass blocking. He's going to impact your wide receivers. And he's going to be able to make off-script plays when things break down.
Mm-hmm.
That's the beautiful thing about him, is that he can affect so much that his talent gives him an opportunity to be a true Heisman candidate if he's just efficient. He doesn't have to come out and throw for 300 yards every game. If he comes out and runs for 50, throws for 250, doesn't turn the ball over, and puts up 2 to 3 touchdowns every week, yeah, he might not be as flashy as the other guys, and numbers might not be as gaudy, but people are going to take notice and say, yo, he was 24 for 29, though.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? He was 21 for 26 for 200. It's like, that's the type of situation and opportunity that's right there in front, and we hope that the development of Tyler Buckner, because even though he hasn't started, he's played in big games.
Right.
Right? He played against Cincinnati.
Right.
He played against Virginia Tech. He's played in hostile environments. So I don't think he's going to walk into the horseshoe with his eyes too big, and the situation is going to be too big for him. I think as long as he plays within himself, he's going to play a very good game.
Yeah.
That's my belief.
I think for me, Sean, if he can be that type of player as a passer, because like I was trying to kind of follow along, like, okay, like when I think of CJ Stroud, I actually think of him as a point guard quarterback because he doesn't run. But I get what you're saying. Then when you said the part about put the offense on your shoulders, like, okay, now I get that, right? Like, okay, I understand.
Yeah.
Because when I think of Tyler, I do think of him as like a Derrick Rose type of point guard, right? Like just that explosive athlete, maybe not the best shooter in the world, or but just explosive athletically and all that. But I think that the interesting thing that I was thought of as you were talking is Tyler Buckner is kind of like two quarterbacks built into one. Mm-hmm. When you go back and watch his junior film, he's like, there's the Tyler Buckner that can sit in the pocket and throw beautiful deep balls, like just dropping over dudes and hit seam routes and read throws. Then there's a Tyler Buckner that plays playground football. That really three quarterbacks. And then there's the Tyler Buckner that you can just run designed runs to.
Yeah.
Right. And I think if he can be that guy that you were talking about as a passer, that's how he becomes in this conversation.
Yeah.
Because the running part's going to be there.
Absolutely.
The scrambling around doing crazy stuff is going to be there. If he can then sit back and, like you said, go 22 of 30 for 280 some yards or 275 yards, plus add another 60, 70 per game as a runner. Now, all of a sudden, you're talking about a guy with 300 plus passing yards, with 700-800 rush yards, with close to 40 touchdowns, that's making highlight reel plays every day, while all the other kids are sitting back playing the same brand of football. Sit back and throw it. Sit back and throw it. Sit back and throw it. And this kid, and that's why I think Johnny Manziel won the Heisman Trophy.
Yeah.
I don't know if I would necessarily say that, was Johnny Manziel in 2012 without question the best player in college football? Maybe. Maybe. But he was just a guy that he kind of had a bit of a breakout year, but he just was so fun to watch. I mean, was Johnny Manziel a better football player that year than Manti Te'o? No, I don't think so. Did Colin Klein carry his team more than Johnny Manziel carried his team? Yeah, I would say so. But what he had was flair. He had flair.
The way he did it, yeah.
Right. And that was the thing. And I think the other part of it is nobody had ever heard of Johnny Manziel before.
Right.
It's his first year as a starter. Johnny Manziel won a Heisman Trophy while passing for 3,700 yards, 8.5 yards per attempt, 26 touchdowns, 9 picks, with a 155 quarterback rating. And he rushed for 1,400 yards, 21 touchdowns, right? Well, the next year, Johnny Manziel passed for over 4,100 yards with a 37 touchdowns, a 172.9 quarterback rating, and a 759 rushing yards and 9 touchdowns. So he was pretty darn dynamic that next year as well.
Yeah.
Much more efficient as a passer. But what was the difference? He was in year 2. You could pick his game apart more, which is what's going to happen to C.J. Stroud and Bryce Young this year. And he was much more of he's just going to sit back and throw it kind of guy. I mean, you could argue that he was a better quarterback overall in 2013. His team wasn't as good. And then next year he finishes 5th in Heisman Trophy. He finished behind Jordan Lynch of Northern Illinois that next year. He finished behind A.J. McCarron that next year, despite throwing for over 1,000 more yards than A.J. McCarron. He had 9 more touchdowns than A.J. McCarron. What was the difference? The newness was gone, right? It was they picked apart his game. They didn't like this. They didn't like that. They, all that other stuff. Well, that's what's going to hurt Bryce Young this year. That's what happened to Trevor Lawrence in his entire career. Just like they kept picking him apart, even though he was a heck of a player. They just kept picking his game apart, and it's what helped Joe Burrow, right? Like he was new. The offense was new. There was a lot of uncertainty about who was this Joe Burrow guy in regards to teams game planning for him. I think that's something else that's going to help Tyler Buckner. Is for the first month of the season, teams aren't going to have any clue what this Notre Dame offense is going to look like in reality. Because if you're studying film of Jack Cohn last year, and then you're studying film of how they played Tyler Buckner, and you think that's what they're going to do, then I just don't think that's what they're going to do.
Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting. Now, am I predicting it? No, I'm not predicting that Tyler Buckner is going to be a Heisman finalist. We're simply talking about if Notre Dame is playing for a title, this is what needs to happen. And that's where that conversation comes from. Here's a sleeper for you, and I'm just going to throw the name out. I'm going to have you respond.
Okay.
It's been in the chat. Chris Tyree.
Really?
Just immediate thoughts. Yeah, I see it.
Yeah, I don't. You're gonna have to give me the composition of this Heisman season.
Let me state this case.
Okay.
1,100 rushing yards.
Okay.
Average is about 7 yards a carry.
Okay.
Okay. Which is like 0.2 below what he did in 2020. 500 plus receiving yards. 4 more touchdowns. Finishes in the top 10 in kick return average with 2 more touchdowns. That gives him – that's going to put him close to 3,000 yards of total of all-purpose yards. And close to 14, 15 touchdowns.
I mean, a season like that, that'll do it.
I think he'd have to get closer. I think he'd have probably be around like 1,200 yards. I think probably rushing 1,200 plus. And I think he'd have to crack the 10. But the thing I look at it and say is –
so that would be basically 12 to 15 touches a game offensively.
That's it.
Yeah, that's about 15 touches per game.
Yeah.
Offensively.
Yeah, that's it.
Which is not out of the realm of possibility.
No, not at all.
And that's not including special teams.
Right. Because I look at like last year.
You're basically building the numbers for a national championship team.
Sure.
With Buckner and Tyree.
Well, like look at last year, right? Look at the kid that won it last year. Kenneth Walker had 1,600 rushing touchdowns or 1,600 rushing yards, 18 touchdowns. He had 89 receiving yards and a touchdown. He had 1,725 total yards, and he was the best running. Finished I think 5th or 6th in the country in rushing. Let's be honest. If Kenneth Walker would have had those numbers and played for Notre Dame last year, he's higher than 6th on the. Let's be honest. If he played at a bigger program, he would have been ranked even higher. If he'd have done those numbers at Alabama, he'd have been higher in the Heisman Trophy list. Chris Tyree at 1,200 and 500 has more yards of offense than Kenneth Walker, and then you throw in the 1,000+ yards he'd have in kick returning because he's already done that.
Yeah.
So that's the thing is I look at and I say, again, because we're going to the theory of if Notre Dame is a Heisman contender, or excuse me, a national title contender, so they're a playoff team,
right?
Somebody's going to get that love, right? So, I'm sorry, it wouldn't be 1,000 yards rushing. It'd be more like 700-800 yards rushing if he's top 10 in the nation in kick returns and takes 2 back to the house.
It's like, dude, like you're saying, 15 touches per game running and receiving the ball.
Right.
Look.
And then you're talking about, let's say, 3 kick returns per game on average at 60 to 70 more yards at least.
Availability. Like, we can talk all we want to about numbers. Like, if he's on the field, he's going to make plays.
Can he be that guy? And I think this goes back to the Tyler Buckner thing. Sometimes the guy that gets the love for the Heisman Trophy is not necessarily the driver of that bus. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And if you're running around trying to stop Michael Mayer and Lorenzo Styles and Tyler Buckner, all of a sudden Chris Tyree just went for 80. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, that's the thing. That's the interesting thing. Because if Notre Dame's a playoff team, somebody's going to get the attention. And who's that going to be?
Yeah.
Again, I think it's the guy that because that's what Notre Dame hasn't had on offense in recent years. Is they haven't had that guy that just had all those highlight reel plays.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that wasn't Kyron. Kyron would occasionally have those kind of plays, but it was like the North Carolina game. But normally Kyron was a grinder. Right? Like, that's why Kyron barely averaged 5 yards a carry for his career. I mean, that's the thing that people got to remember is, yes, Kyron was a really good football player, but he was a grinder. I mean, what was he? He was 5.3 yards per carry last year, or 2020. He was 4.9 this past year. He averaged 5.1 yards per carry for his career.
Yeah.
I mean.
And Kyron, the more I understand that the offensive line was an issue, but Kyron.
But the year before, when they were a Joe Moore finalist, he only averaged 5.3.
Yeah, at times he was a little bit too patient and just didn't put his foot into the ground and go get yards that were there.
Right.
Instead of just looking for, the opportunity to make the big play.
I mean, he was yards per carry wise, he was beneath what Torian Folston was before the knee injury. That's not a guess. That's what the numbers are. I mean, Torian was at 5.3 as a freshman, 5.1 as a sophomore, and his 6.3 as a junior on 3 carries.
He was good.
Yeah.
He was so good.
Yeah.
He was so good. People forget how good he was.
Yeah. So that's kind of my thing is Tyree could be that.
I agree.
That numbers guy, especially the pass game with it. So it'll be interesting to see how that all
hits those numbers. I agree. Yeah.
Be interesting. Very, very interesting. And the other option is they all three play so good that they kind of cancel each other out. Because Notre Dame won't get the benefit of the doubt of having 2 top 5 guys like Alabama and
3 in the top 10,
Ohio State and all that kind of. No, they won't get that. They won't get that. Because they don't have that same regional media thing that you get with some of those other schools. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like the Midwest media voters are going to rally around, Notre Dame for their Heisman candidacy. You know what I mean?
I would venture to say that Kyle Hamilton was a top 5 Heisman candidate until Cincinnati. He had the 2 big plays in that first game. He had
even though he wasn't playing great, I get what you're saying.
He had the highlight plays.
He was getting a lot of love.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he had that big 4th down stop against Purdue.
Yeah.
If he had come through with a big game against Cincinnati.
Yeah. And he did not play well at all.
And he didn't get hurt.
Cincinnati.
No.
He was bad.
No. So
that's the funny thing though, Sean, with all this is because you're making a case that I agree with, but he wasn't nearly as good of a player in 2021 as he was in 2020.
No.
But he made the flashy plays.
Mm-hmm.
And let's be honest, that's what a lot of voters go with. They're going to go with what they see, right? They're going to go with numbers.
Yeah.
And that's what they do. They don't break film down, sadly, but that's just the reality of it. So
Heck, I can't lie. I still marvel at the 2 interceptions against Florida State.
Oh, they were unreal.
Like,
But then there was 2 other just terrible plays he made that game that could have cost him.
Yeah.
And he didn't play very well against Toledo. But that's the thing that was so frustrating about Kyle last year, is because, man, when he was right and was playing within the system, boy, he could make some unreal plays. I mean, just unreal plays.
The almost pick 6 against
Purdue. We were just talking about that. Yeah.
Like,
I mean, nobody else even gets their hand on that ball.
No.
Much less almost picks it off.
No. And the quarterback felt like there's no way he gets out there.
Yeah.
And he almost takes it back the other way. So, yeah.
Yeah.